Good evening and welcome to Success in the Evening. I'm your host, Coach Ricky Terry, president of One Due North LLC, your professional mentoring and coaching company. And we have a great show for you today. Matter of fact, I hope you brought your sweat towel. You're going to need it because I got some guests that's going to make you sweat. So get your towel ready. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about life. We're going to laugh. And then we're going to talk about the mission that you're about to be given to ensure that not just your small community, but the entire country moves towards getting women out not only to vote, but out to run for offices. See, we've gone through a mighty change in this country, and women have moved to their rightful position, the forefront. And you know I'm excited about that. As the only brother to five sisters, I am not a stranger to women in leadership. Even though I'm the oldest, my sisters have been leaders in their communities and in their homes, well, since they hit this earth. And so it is no surprise to me that women are now taking their rightful place. Today's conversation is for everyone. I want you to gather every little girl around how you listen to this because they're going to hear voices that sound like theirs. They're going to see images that look like them. And so often we hear, how do we get involved? Well, today you're going to get it. And this is a really special show for me because it's the first time that we've brought on air my favorite guest. You know, the girl of my dreams, Miss Danita Terry. Danita's going to tell you a little bit about our guest, and then we are going to get started. So don't go nowhere. I promise you, you're going to enjoy today's show. Danita, how are you, sweetheart?
I am fine, honey.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. But I think we're supposed to be serious, so we don't often get to work together. But I want to welcome you to Success in the Evening. Thank you for coming on board. I want you to tell us first, if you don't mind, about your upcoming program that you have, and then would you introduce our guest to the world?
I'd be happy to. On February 23rd, I am having a fundraiser for Black History Month for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And I am pleased that both of these women will be panelists for a discussion that we're having, talking about what is the next step? How can we keep the momentum that has been building for generations going? And how can we take the achievements of women elected officials to the next level? How can we invite more women in? So the first speaker is Tiffany Gardner, and she's CEO of Reflect Us, a national nonpartisan coalition of leading women's representation organizations that are working to increase the number of women elected and appointed to public office. Tiffany brings over a decade of extensive international experience in human rights advocacy and domestic public interest. She's worked on women's rights, human rights, and grassroots organizing throughout Africa, Southeast Asia, and the United States. She's a graduate of Yale University, New York University School of Law, and Columbia University Law School. She is a former mergers and acquisitions associate for Skadden, Arps, Slate, Megger, and Flom LLP. Welcome, Tiffany. Our next guest is Yvette Lewis, and she is the chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. Yvette is a long-time grassroots activist with a proven record as a Democratic leader. She's raised over $7 million and run two successful statewide coordinated campaigns. She served the party in many critical and effective ways, including on the campaigns of Bill Clinton, Steny Hoyer, and Barack Obama. This is her second time serving as chair. We wish her all the success, and we welcome you both to Success in the Evening.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, I want to say welcome. Ladies, I want to say welcome. Danita, thank you for that introduction. And thank you for bringing these guests to the show. And ladies, as we said before we started, let's hold a salon barbershop style conversation. Let's get down in the collard greens if you don't mind. And so, Tiffany, we're going to start with you. I got a question for both of you, but I want to start with you if you don't mind. Recently, we witnessed history. We watched the first woman ascend to the highest office in the United States of America, the vice presidency. Tell me, how did it make you feel watching that moment happen?
Vindicated.
Vindicated?
For a word, vindicated. I think that well we know African Americans and the African American community know the contribution and the sacrifices that Black women have made to America and to our democracy since the founding of this country, and the soul of this country, in large part being on the backs and at the urging and pushings of Black women. So for me, a lot of feelings when I saw Kamala become Madam Vice President, but one of them was vindication.
Wow. Well, I gotta ask you, Miss Lewis, um, when you watched your work, when you watched all of the effort that you have put into bringing women to the polls, helping them get where they wanted to go, what is the satisfaction for you, and how did you feel watching that moment?
Well, I was actually there. I was at the inaugural, and full disclosure, I cried as soon as Madam Vice President said, "So help me God." I cried, and I tried very hard not to let it be the ugly cry. Now we're going to talk down home. We're going to talk down home. I tried not to let it be the cry where I totally lost control and tried to maintain some dignity. But at that moment, I saw my grandmother. I saw my college educated grandmother and grandfather who struggled to be business owners in North Carolina, to pour everything they could into me, to make sure that I had the best that they could give to me. My grandmother, my parents, all of that came rushing in. I saw Howard University because I went to Howard. I saw my days on campus walking the same yard that she walked. I saw all of the young women that were part of the sorority that we are a part of. I saw their aspirations, I saw their hopes, I saw their dreams, and I saw everyone taking collective ownership of that moment, because we all had a part in that moment. Every single woman, as Ms. Gardner has said, every single woman that has ever aspired to be or to do anything, or every single woman who has just been a mother, a wife, a teacher, a consoler, a financial advisor, a comforter, all of that just came rushing into me, into that one moment, because I saw the success of that hard work in that one shining moment when she said, "So help me God."
Wow. Well, I got to ask you, what was your pathway into politics?
It is the craziest pathway ever,
Uh-oh.
which means that you never ever stop when you think you are there. You always have to keep striving. I was a teacher who wanted to be an opera singer. I had a brief career as an opera singer. I performed overseas and did some work here in the United States. After that, I decided that I needed to be at home and not travel quite so much. I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed singing, so I created a program that combined the two. It was called So This Is Opera, where I introduced children to opera. I wrote a curriculum and did opera residency programs. I was a teaching artist. My program was eventually picked up by 7 states, where children in 7 states I actually interacted with as a teaching artist, doing residencies and assembly programs. But it was the George Bush, Al Gore campaign that propelled me into politics, because after the Bush Gore election, I saw people that were so emotionally torn and upset by that election. And I couldn't participate in that agony, if you will, because I hadn't done anything except vote. And I didn't get the intense feelings that people were having, but I did get the intensity of seeing something that wasn't right. something that wasn't right about that election. And I decided then that I would never, ever sit back in another election cycle and just vote.
That
Although
was the
voting is
hanging.
important.
That was the hanging
It was
chads
the
and the
hanging chad,
Supreme
like
Court.
that's exactly, and the Supreme Court. And
Mhm.
that just, from that moment on, I said, I am going to invest in a campaign. I'm going to invest my time and my energy and my money into a candidate to make sure that this never happens again. But it was really Barack Obama
Oh
where
boy.
it got on, where everything went on steroids. I mean, seriously, I did so much. I even went down to Hampton, Virginia to do training to become an organizing fellow, and then came back to Maryland. And we opened 2 offices here in Maryland for Barack Obama. And we were the 2 of the highest performing officers in terms of phone banks and canvassing and all of the work that we did for President Obama. But after he won, I felt that there was this collective a narrative to try to do everything they could to keep him from being a successful president.
Mm.
So
Well,
we formed
they
a group.
said that.
They did. So we formed a group of friends and I formed a group called Grow the Hope, where we were going to be his rapid responders. I formed the first rapid response team here in Maryland, where we would go to call talk radio. We would send letters to the newspaper. We would have community events, anything we could do to prop up Barack Obama. And somehow I got the attention of Martin O'Malley, who felt that he wanted that same grassroots energy brought into the Maryland Democratic Party. So tag, I was it. And that's how I
The
became
former,
the chair of the party, the former governor of Maryland. Yes.
yes, and we're going to talk about that because you made a statement on your first at the mic, your second time around, that just blew people's mind. But we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Miss Gardner, because I don't tell you, I'm calling you Miss Gardner. I ain't messing with your husband. I ain't messing with him. Tell us about your entry into politics in that arena and where you come in at.
Wow. Sure, I'm happy to. I never, well, so where I place myself in the work, I'm a grassroots organizer by at heart and by nature. So I place myself in the history of this country and in racial politics. So both of my parents came from the Deep South, and they both grew up under Jim Crow, and a lot of the hardship and the struggle that Miss Lewis talked about was very much a part of my awareness growing up. So that's just sort of how I'm built in my DNA. So once I went off to Yale University, I found my tribe in a lot of ways, and began studying politics and grassroots movements. Started a undergraduate student organization called the Yale Black Political Forum, and this is in the sort of mid-90s. We had guests such as Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Sister Soja and Lonnie Guinier and Anita Hill, and really bringing that conversation to campus. And a lot of that started because the main political organization at Yale at the time was the Yale Political Union. And so when they decided to have a real rich conversation about affirmative action, you sort of have the pro and the con. So they had their person set up for the pro, or rather the con against it. And the person who was supposed to talk for affirmative action, they decided of all our national figures was Don King, the boxing promoter.
Mm.
So outside of the insult, right? And then not, being, academically honest at all, we started the Yale Political Forum. So with that being said, that was really a lot of my political acculturation in that way. From there, I went off and I took time off from Yale and went to South Africa. This was right around the end of apartheid. I worked with the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, did a lot of grassroots organizing in the townships in South Africa, in Cape Town in particular. And then went off and did work in Ghana, Cambodia, working with women's rights work. And for me, the whole ethos of sort of why I do what I do, or how I think I do what I do, is, I'm a firm believer that community organizing and efforts led by the ground and by the people are really what changes society and really breaks up these schisms. If you think about the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, you have these amazing leaders, don't get me wrong, but it's really the groundwork and the folks on the ground and this committed organizations and organizing of people on the ground and at the base. So I worked at the UN for a while, and again, all of this ethos was around how do you give power and how do you build mass mobilizations of directly impacted people, right? So after being overseas for a while, I started a not-for-profit called One World Exchange, which really does just that. So my best friend is HBCU grad as well, Lincoln University. And so we started the One World Exchange. And what we do through that is that we give young people of color, college students, and poor young people opportunities to go abroad for the summer and to do human rights work and social justice work, with the idea of how do you bring solidarity, coalition across borders. Because, for instance, when I was in India working with Dalit communities, the so-called untouchables, when you really look at sort of the housing deprivations, the health deprivations, the education deprivations, they were very similar to what was happening to, Black folk in New Orleans, right? So there's this very similarity of experience and of hardship and of oppression that we see globally. So how do you begin to build coalitions in that way? So this was about 2006. Hurricane Katrina hits, and being, very much based in the U.S. and having Southern parents, I kept hearing there's problems here at home, there's problems here at home while I was doing all my work overseas. And then Hurricane Katrina hits, and that puts it on the forefront. And that's when I came back home and started doing organizing in the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, New Orleans in particular, around housing rights issues, and built up a national housing coalition that way with poor Black folk, white folk, brown folk around the country, and got a lot of movement and some positive directions that way. And then, sort of doing my work and being me, and I got a call about this coalition called Reflect Us. And although I had never sort of found myself in a political space in that way, I am a firm believer, as I said, in coalition building and in the power of working together when it's done right. And knowing, what I see and sort of the real lack of representation. And although this Congress was a huge boon in a lot of ways, and although Madam Vice President is a huge boon, we still have a far way to go. Our Senate is only 26% women. Our House of Representatives only 23% women. Currently, there are no African American women in the Senate, where, if you ask me, there should be. Madam Vice President should have been replaced with a Black woman, as far as I'm concerned. Also, there's no Black woman at this time that has House leadership. So for me, I felt this could be a way for me to use all of my experiences, both internationally and grassroots organizing, to help to bring notice and movement in an issue that I think is very important to this country.
Well, let me ask you then, Madam Chairwoman. She brought up points that while we have the vice president in the Senate, we don't have a voice that is in leadership. What do we do about that? How do we fix it?
So one of the things that I think has happened just since about 2016, 2018, women are really coming to the forefront. They've had a taste of victory, and they recognize the power of their voice. They recognize the power of their vote. It's always been there, but in some, it's like a renaissance. It's a reawakening for some. And once you have that type of success, people don't necessarily want to go back. They want to continue to win because winning feels good. And we are capitalizing on that with the trainings that we do here in Maryland. We have all types of opportunities for women to be involved. We have Emerge, as I mentioned earlier before we came on camera, which is a wonderful group that has a 5-month training program for women that are interested in running for office that tells them everything from soup to nuts, what they need to do. And we have a number of Emerge graduates that are currently serving in our state legislature. And we are extremely proud of them. We also have women that are signing up to volunteer and to be a part of all of the things that we're doing here, specifically at the Maryland Democratic Party. We have a diversity leadership councils, our diversity leadership councils that focuses on women's issues and women to bring them into the fold, to bring them as part of the conversation. We are the only state party in the nation that has 2 African-American women as leaders, a chair and executive director. There is no other state party in the nation that has 2 African-American women leading the state party. And to that end, we have been extremely successful over this last year, in addition to increasing the number of people that are actually participating in what we're doing. The Maryland Democratic Party, with women at the forefront of what we're doing, we were one of the leading export states. By that I mean we were calling into swing states because we weren't necessarily a targeted state, we're a blue state. So we called into Pennsylvania and we called into Arizona. We made over 350,000 calls into swing states in this last election cycle. We also, with the women that we have that are part of our leadership coalition and our constituents, we have put on a successful Democratic convention, which we had to do virtually. We just did a gala where we are including as many people as possible. So the whole thing for us is conversations, is outreach, making opportunities available for women, working closely with our stakeholder partners that are involved with women's issues. Next month is Women's History Month. We have a fabulous program that we're working on next month for Women's History Month. One of the things that my executive director and I have started talking about is doing something with financial literacy and empowerment for women, because a lot of women are head of households, and even if they're whether they're single mothers or they're women who manage the finances in their households. So this is another opportunity to empower women. So that's what we're all about at the Maryland Democratic Party, making sure that we're as inclusive as possible, but particularly focusing on this constituency group that has found their voice in a way that has everybody paying attention and listening.
Well, the both of you are doing great work. You're doing grassroots, and we found out. For me, it was, as you said, through Barack Obama, the real importance of grassroots organizing, the importance of partnering with others to strengthen yourself. Tiffany, if you don't mind, how important is it when a activist, if you will, starts an organization, that they don't start off single-handed, but that they partner with other organizations? How important is that partnership?
Well, well, let me back up for a second. What I will say is, to answer that question, I think partnerships and coalition buildings, and being in all the coalitions I have been in, both nationally and internationally, I think it is important to partner, but I think it's also very important to be very clear with sort of rules of operation, as it were. I think sometimes when one of the challenges that one wants to be mindful of when entering into coalition and partnership is that you don't leave the table until the least of these their needs have been met,
Mm.
right? And so a lot of times in coalition building, if you get into partnership and if, okay, I got mine, I'm out the door, thanks a lot, well, then the least of these will be left out. And unfortunately, a lot of times the least of these, just the way things shape up, look like folks from the African American community. So I'm always very mindful of that. And to speak back to the last comment, what I will say is that while there has been a lot of success, and I know Ms. Lewis is doing an amazing job in Maryland and has been such sort of a really a model for the rest of the country. In a lot of places, there are a lot of challenges there. And so from a national perspective, one of the things that I have to think about in my role as CEO of this national coalition is sort of how do we make real systemic change with respect to our representation. So one of the things that we are doing through our 9 coalition members are the training, the leadership development, definitely through higher heights, and She Should Run and Vote Run Lead, but also looking at institutional change, right? Because legislatively, if you look at a lot of just the state laws and the federal laws on the books, it just makes it very difficult to run if you're not already empowered. If you're not already a part of the club, it's very hard to get into the club. And for women, it's just sort of, it works that much more to a detriment for them. So things such as campaign financing, campaign funding. So no matter how much money you raise in a campaign, for instance, you can use it for a lot of different things. But one of the things you can't use it for is childcare. So who is that really going to work against, right? It's going to work against women, right? And then if you think about a lot of these, most women, most people, but most women in particular get involved in politics at the local level because of concerns, be it the school board, the city council, and a lot of those positions are unpaid. So again, who's that really going to fall on, right? Is women. So let's think about how do we really talk about a real transformative process where we really change and where we really change systems and institutions, not just the training, which is very, very important, don't get me wrong, but you can train a woman till the last cow comes home. But if you still have these institutional barriers up, then there's still going to be barriers for her to run. And the final thing I'll say about that, and Ricky, I think you'll appreciate this, is that in addition to the training that we do, in addition to the institutional change, the legislative work that we're doing in building this national legislative agenda, we're also thinking about, when we think about women running, we want to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of the upside down politics, where although they're now women at the top, there's still women who come from certain kind of backgrounds, which is great to see women. And we need, so again, I gave you the percentages, we need far more women. At the same time, let's make sure that we're thinking about our women who are already leaders in our communities and looking at working class women, right? Because there's a big gulf there in terms of who has the ability to run for office who gets elected. And again, in these local offices, these local appointments, local government impacts your life so much more than federal government does anyway. So we actually have a fellowship program called It Begins Here. We're piloting it in Dallas and Texas, and we're going to build it nationally. We're focusing on working class women, where we're going to train them, give them the support they need, the institutional change as well. But more importantly, and Ms. Lewis spoke to this, we're partnering with Elevest, which is a financial firm geared towards women, talking about financial independence, talking about, financial success. Because I think for me, again, when I think more broadly and globally about the type of representative government we want in this country, we do want more women. But my goodness, we want people who are from directly impacted communities. I think that the social uprisings of this past summer have taught us that. So how do we make sure that those women, Black women, brown women, white women, but how to make sure those women, their voices are being heard?
Well, I'm concerned about one thing, and both of you can take this. When we talk about grassroots entering into politics, we saw from one side what happens when the crazies get involved in politics. We can't miss the elephant in the room here. Today is the second day of the impeachment trials as we're recording this. And one of the people, I won't mention her name on here, she's Republican, and she came from a grassroots organization, but it just festers all of the wrong message, I believe. How do we filter that out to ensure that, well, the Democrat, Republican, or Independent, we got people who really represent a good slice of the community. This can't be the best slice of the community that ramshacked the Capitol. It can't be. I don't care if it's 75,000, 75 million. This can't be the best part of us. How do we filter that out so we're not training the wrong people? How do we do that?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll speak very quickly, and I know Ms. Lewis, you probably have far more than I do to say about that. I would actually counter a bit, Ricky, and I would say that those individuals, I wouldn't say that they do have a base, right? I wouldn't say they do have a base. I think, if you think about the former president, he came from a very particular background. I would not say that it was a base building grassroots background whatsoever. I don't believe that his background was community led or community influenced, right? I think those people are individuals that are politicking and profiting from some anger, some very sort of ugly feelings that people have out there. But by no wise would I say that they do have a base in the constituency. That's the first thing I would say. I think you're speaking to larger issues of just quite honestly the Republican Party, right? And sort of some real hard.
You said that, I didn't.
Well, I'll just say it, right? Because we're talking about training, right? But still, there's some hard conversations that particular party has to have in terms of the future of that party. But I think when I talk about the importance of getting women from directly impacted communities, we're talking about like your sisters that you talked about, those women who are already leaders in their communities, recognized leaders in their communities, making change in their communities, but just for, economic reasons, lack of network, they're not being identified and therefore supported in political leadership. And those are the voices that we need to be hearing from, who come from qualified communities, are leaders in their communities already, have the respect of their communities. Those are the voices we need to hear more of.
Okay, Ms. Lewis?
So, I think that those people tend to get more coverage. I'm not sure the numbers are as great as we would be led to believe. That's a good media story. So the media is going to focus on that segment of the population, thus giving the impression that their numbers are far greater. Now, what happened at the Capitol was horrific. It was horrible, but there were not millions and millions of people. There were not 70 million people storming the Capitol, right? Okay. So I think what we have to do is to do what Stacey Abrams did. And I think we have a responsibility to do a stealth campaign, if you will. What she was able to do underground, they didn't see coming until all those voters came out of the woodwork. They had no idea that she was doing that kind of granular work. That's what we have to do. We do that granular grassroots work, working within our community, registering those voters, engaging those voters, educating those voters, making those voters civically powerful, so that by the time it is time to make their voices heard, they have all of the information they have, so that more and more those numbers of the loud people that are getting covered by the media go down and down and down. I would dare say, if you gathered every single person that stormed the Capitol on the 6th and said, let's go back and do it again, I would bet you dollars to donuts that those numbers are down, because they had no idea, first of all, that they were going to come back and be facing legal expenses, legal jeopardy, possible prison terms, but definitely ruined reputations, right? So I dare say, if all of those people were polled right now and you say, okay, guys, we're going to do the same thing again, I don't think you'd have as many people. I really don't.
Wow.
So I think that what we need to do is focus on the people that want to see this country move forward. Right here alone in Maryland, I think we had something like 2,300, I think it's 2,300 people who left the Republican Party now because of what they saw. 9,000 people in Arizona left the Republican Party because of what they saw. Those are the people that we need to be talking to. Those are the people that we need to say, let's form a bigger tent. Let's form a tent that wants to see democracy prevail. Let's form a tent that wants to see America be successful. But let's form a tent that says we want to work together as neighbors and not as enemies. So I think that we can build good out of what happened with people that were so repulsed by what they saw at the Capitol on January 6th. And maybe, just maybe, form a new and a more powerful coalition of Americans that want to move this country forward, led by women.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why do you believe it's important for women to run for that office? And what are some other ways that women can get involved?
Representation matters. Representation matters. So the only way our issues will be articulated in a way that is respectful, but also powerful enough to be heard, is for people that have that living experience. Women have that living experience, and we multitask. We have our hands in so many pots, so many things that we're capable of doing, that we need to have our voices heard. You get involved by volunteering. You get involved by getting involved with club meetings and your state central committees, and going to visit with your elected officials, going and talking to your elected officials. When your elected officials have town hall meetings, go to those meetings, become informed, even if it starts at the very granular level of your homeowners association or your school board. Just become involved and make yourself aware of what's going on in your community, so that if you see there is something that you think can be done better, then you look inward and say, I'm the person that can do that better. And that's the first step in getting women out there. But get involved, volunteer, educate yourself, make relationships, build friendships, build coalitions, and then say, I can do that, and give women the courage and the permission to step out there and do it.
Tiffany?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I would say in sort of the why, what is the opportunity sort of proposition here, is that, by and large, when we see that when women are in elected position, they introduce far more legislation, right? B, a lot of the bills that they introduce and then are, eventually passed, are not just sort of women's related issues, but they impact the entire family, right? So as a way to socially move this country forward, by and large, in terms of like just the deep political divides we have now that we're seeing, women tend to work across the aisle just a lot better. I mean, they're just busier. They get there to get to work, you know what I mean? And so they're just all around busier, and they're just sort of more productive in that way. And so I think that the case isn't why women, or why is this a good thing for women, but it's really why is this a good thing for the country, right? You just see a governing and a government that's just sort of much more effective. And I would also just pause and say, in particular during this like time of, COVID and the pandemic, right? How it's just ravaged this country, ravaged communities. And I go back to directly impacted communities, our communities of color, our poor communities, our female headed households. The New York Times just had this, very, very, heart-wrenching article this past Sunday on how the pandemic has impacted women, right? Working women, stay-at-home moms with kids, in school or kids out of school or kids remote, and just caring for elderly relatives. So, one of the things when Melinda Gates and Bill Gates really put this forward, and I think it was pretty impactful, that as we think about COVID recovery, it really has to have women at its center, right? We are the ones that are taking care of our elderly. We are the ones that are taking care of the children by and large. So kind of the question really isn't why women, it's kind of why not women, right?
Why not women? I gotta agree. I know where I'm from. I don't pretend to be on high. I'm from small town Asheville, North Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, very blue collar kind of working people, most of them living paycheck to paycheck. And we already know some positions, as you stated, Tiffany, aren't paid positions. But I don't know if we've hammered home, Miss Lewis and Tiffany, the importance of everyone getting involved, to be involved in this. And I'm not sure, because I'm not involved in politics, and I made a promise this year that I was going to get involved in local politics. I'm a soldier. I'm a former drill instructor. I'm a soldier. I take orders and I make things happen. But I'm watching. There were some orders given this year that my military training taught me. If the order is unlawful, you don't follow it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get the right women out there who think they already think I have nothing to give? How do we convince them that because you've kept your house out of COVID, because you've kept your house from going under, because your kids haven't visited the system, if you know what I mean, because you've managed to keep things afloat, you're better at equipped at this than most? How do we convince them that we need them in this fight? That seems to be the struggle.
Well, those of us that are out there, we mentor them. We start bringing them in under our wing and helping them to see it's not anywhere as difficult as what you do in your everyday life. I mean, by the time you have managed your kids, done the finances, taking care of your own personal responsibilities, and taking care of anything else, whether it's parents, like you say, caregivers, all of the things that women juggle on a daily basis, what this civic engagement is nothing in comparison. But
Where
the
did they
main thing,
start in Maryland? I'm sorry cutting you off, but where did they start in Maryland? I want to be pinpoint.
so
Where did they start?
for me, I started by volunteering. I really did. I would go to community meetings. I would go to town halls, as I said before, and just listening. The very first campaign I worked on when I came back here, my husband and I moved back here from Michigan, was Kwesi Mfume's campaign when he ran for the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I knew him. He was a friend. And I said, I think he'll be great. So I volunteered, and it meant something as simple as going and sitting in an office and making phone calls to people to tell them why they should vote for Kwesi Mfume.
Now,
And,
go ahead. Go
and
ahead.
the thing that was exciting for me is when I got that one person on the phone that said, you got my vote, right? And then from there, you just keep doing it and you keep doing it and you keep doing it. Now, what you also have to do is look at what's for the greater good. So as it turns out, Kwesi Mfume did not win the senatorial nomination here in Maryland, but Ben Cardin was our candidate. My focus was what was best for Maryland. He was decided by the people to be best for Maryland. I didn't take my marbles and go home. I wanted to continue to work. So then I switched and I worked in Ben Cardin's campaign to make sure that he got elected, because it was about staying involved and staying engaged. I called girlfriends and invited them to come and go with me. Or I had phone banks here at my house. Put out a little cheese, a little crackers, some wine. We're going to make some phone calls, call in friends and neighbors. Then we bring in more people to the process. So it's all about conversations. That's how you get started. You get started with that initial conversation of telling someone about your experience with your civic engagement and telling them, and then inviting them to come along. And each one brings one in. That's how you get started.
There you go. Ms. Lewis?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would
Ms.
add.
Gardner, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I would add just a step back that you are right, Ricky. That I think that I know that running for office can be very scary and very intimidating, and so I think we need to just sort of address that, right? We talk about imposter syndrome, right? So one of our coalition members, She Should Run, really has an amazing training on that imposter syndrome and how if you ask a man, they do studies and all this stuff, and so the studies come out that if you ask a man once, maybe twice to run for office, he's like, oh, I should have ran years ago and I should be running for president. And for a woman, you have to ask her repeatedly and repeatedly, because back to that imposter syndrome. Well, I don't have this education. I haven't had this experience. I haven't done this, and that. And so women feel like they need to have every T crossed, every I dotted before they even consider running for office, where men are like, half baked, as it were, and they're out there running for, the highest office in the land, so to speak. Right. So that is a real challenge that we have. I think that, with our coalition and our coalition members individually, and then as a collective, we have really been thinking deeply about that. So She Should Run has this amazing campaign called Change Is Her that talks about about that. You in your own right, as a community leader, as a mom, as a daughter, as a granddaughter, you have what it takes. That's what changes her. Ignite has an amazing training now on police commissions, right? Back to the social justice uprisings we had and talking about, okay, this is what directly impacts your community, right? Who are on your police commissions? Who are on your police force? You need to get on there, right? Ignite has Run As You Are. You're fine exactly as you run exactly as you are. And then WPLN, which is more of our, sort of more of our traditional center right, they have a training program, and in their training programs, they offer childcare, right? So let's be practical about this thing. But I think if we are going to really see the seismic shifts that I believe we need to see in this country with respect to representation, again, we have to go back and make sure we're supporting those women you were just talking about. So we've just announced, as of last week, our state networks, and it's called From the Ground Up. We're partnering in states. We've begun in Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Washington State, and Vermont, and we're already in Texas. And From the Ground Up partners with grassroots organizations, right? So in Virginia, for instance, we're with Virginia Organizing. It's a base building organization. They're already leaders. They're already doing their own advocacy and activism around change, around social change. So how do we take those same women? How do we now poise them for political leadership, right? So I think it has to be a very concerted effort, a very deliberate effort. From the ground up, we're quite happy with some of the results we're seeing as we're partnering with grassroots organizations and the women that they're servicing to build them up for political leadership. And I think just as, we're very deliberate in this country about what we think leadership should look like and how we get behind the men and women that we think a president should look like, or that we think a vice president should look like, we have to do the same thing for those people living these experiences in these directly impacted communities who really, above any of us, are going to feel it, right? If there is a local ordinance in a town that impacts folks, it's going to be the folks on the bottom that feel it the most. If it's a federal law that's really going to impact people, those in the middle class, those that are wealthy, they can kind of skirt it, they'll be okay. It's those at the bottom that are going to feel it the hardest. And those are the ones who need to be in these halls of power making these decisions, because they and their families are really going to feel it. And so we at Reflect Us are really being very deliberate and intentional about how do we reach them. Everything from financial training, financial independence for these women, to childcare, to changing legislation that makes it easier for them to run, and everything in between.
Well, go ahead, ma'am.
No, I was going to say, I just love that. And what I'm hearing in everything that you just said, Ms. Gardner, is women have to help women.
Yes.
That's the main thing. Women have to be there for women, because instinctively, and I just had this conversation with someone last night, which is why I was smiling, someone telling me something that I should be doing, that I should do. And my first inclination was, no, I don't think I can. No, I'm not, and then I had to stop and say, if not me, who?
Who?
And that is a self-talk that as a woman, I am constantly doing. And if I don't know anybody, there may be some women out there that don't have to do that self-talk, but I have to do that self-talk. And I go to something that the person who has just captured my heart since the inauguration, Amanda Gorman, she said, there's always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I have to recite that mantra over and over and over again. It's about being brave enough to see it and then to be it, and then helping other women be brave enough to see it and to be it. So we have to always help each other. So what you said was so powerful. That really, really touched me, what you just said.
Well, let me ask you a question. You both are going to be speaking at a Salute to Maryland Black Women Legislatures on February 23rd from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the general public is invited to this event. As a teaser, what are you going to share? And we'll start with you, Ms. Lewis, Chairwoman Lewis. What are you going to share?
I want to share things that I don't normally talk about, those feelings that I have, those things that I personally wrestle with in terms of my day-to-day struggle to always be of service, to always make sure that I'm putting others first and not my own desire for any ascension in any way. My years on the stage, I was always out front. I don't need to be out front anymore. I want to be behind the scenes. I always wanted to be the director. Now I get to be the director. That means I help empower other candidates. I help get other candidates elected. I help expand and grow our Democratic base and party here in Maryland. And that is, I want to talk about the struggle that I go through constantly, just wondering from day to day, can I do this? Am I going to make it? what can I do today that doesn't set us back, that always moves us forward? And it is a struggle. It is a challenge. There's a joke among my staff at the state party, because I don't sleep sometimes. And when I don't sleep, I sit up and I create, because the music that I wrote music for children. And so I have some things out there that are published. And I always wrote my music in the middle of the night because I didn't sleep. So I always come up with these ideas for the state party when I don't sleep in the middle of the night. So if I come in the next day and say, oh God, I didn't sleep, they all just take out their notebooks, because they know instinctively we got something else that we're
You
about
sound
to
like
do.
my house.
Yes. So those are the struggles that I would really like to talk about, because they're real. And although sometimes people think that you exude a certain amount of confidence, it's not always there.
They don't know what you go through to get to that point. It's difficult. It's difficult to. Everybody thinks it's easy to lead. It's one of the most difficult things that you can do, is to take on the responsibility of leadership, because that's the absence of your wants and now the needs of the team. And that is key to success. It was key to my tours overseas, is understanding that the mission was bigger than me. I got to ask you, Ms. Gardner, what are you hoping to say?
Well, that's a nice segue. I think for me, and as you know, Miss Lewis and Chairwoman Lewis was so honest and very refreshing in that way. I'll say for me, if there's anything that keeps me up at night, and I have two small boys at home, so besides Isaiah and Solomon.
Isaiah and Solomon?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Solomon
Okay.
and Isaiah. If there's anything that keeps me up at night besides them, it's just the moment that we're in right now in this pandemic, and knowing that in a real way, after the dust settles, there are going to be some people and some communities and some families that never come back and never recover. And they were already underwater or close to being underwater before the pandemic, and that they're drowning. And I don't know. Very, very, it's going to be very difficult. And I think a large part of sort of who's able to be okay and even excel in this time of pandemic is across economic lines. It's across racial lines. Let's just call it what it is. We're going to have a pre and post pandemic world. And so for me, it's going to be, how do we make sure that as we talk about leadership and in a representative democracy, that those same people that are going to be the most impacted and are being the most impacted by this pandemic have a say in how we recover and how we build this country. Because if not, they're just going to be the lost generation. I mean, you talk about schools, and I was just reading one report where, they're estimating now that kids are probably about 9 months behind in education. Well, that's a whole school year. So they missed a school year, right? Now I'm blessed in that my boys are in private school, right? But that's not the norm, and that's not the norm for poor folks. That's not the norm for a lot of Black folks. So we really have to think long and hard about, when we talk about, the recovery, post-pandemic world, what type of leadership we want. How do we get those same people in there to make sure that the recovery somehow, in some way, addresses their very real needs, and not just go to Wall Street.
Well, I agree with you. And I want to say to the general public, these are just two of the speakers that are going to be presenting and telling their story and encouraging you and reminding you of your civic duty, your obligation to help this country. If you are sitting back and waiting to roll downhill, don't worry, it's coming. But if you are willing to get up, roll up your sleeves, lift your voice and speak out loud, then you can stop this onslaught that has been going on. And the best way to stop it is not to wait for someone else, but to stand up and say, enough is enough. You've been listening to some very powerful leaders, not just women, but very powerful leaders. And now I'm going to cut away from that, and I'm going to go to the heart of what matters. I never questioned my role as a brother to my sisters. It was never a question of where I stood. My mom said, if one fight, you all fight. It didn't matter. So when I see you ladies fighting, I'm fighting. What message would you send to brothers, uncles, grandfathers, dads, community males who really care? Because the danger, and I've told my wife this, the danger I fear is that as women, especially women of color, excel, that there is yet again this separation. And I don't believe it is a separation, but there's this possible feeling of men feeling left behind. I am not that man, because I didn't grow up in that house, and my wife would have me by my ear if I tried it now. But what message do you send to men in terms of what you ladies and leaders are doing now and how they can support their household when it's time for that woman who decides I need to raise my voice. How can we help?
I'll respond briefly and then let Madam Chairwoman respond. Ricky, I'll push back just a little bit on that. At least when it comes to the African American community, I feel like, and I want to say this the right way, but I do feel like, at least traditionally speaking, and things have changed and times have changed, but I think traditionally speaking, there has been a recognition in the community of the role of women, but more importantly, the leadership of women. A lot of us have come, and you talked about your grandmother, your mother. I can talk about my mother, my two grandmothers, right? I think there's a strong respect and appreciation for leadership, in particular in our community, that in some ways, just because of our history here, is probably a bit unique from other communities, right? So I've yet, and again, things change, times change, but I think that sort of that natural kind of, men sort of pushing away female leadership just hasn't been as much of a presence in our community. Again, historically speaking, spiritually speaking, I think that we've always had strong women in our communities that have been supported in different ways. And of course, that's not always, but I just wanted to start with that. I would also say, with that being said, just looking at the numbers, so if you look at sort of Black women in Congress, right? So out of the 142 women in Congress, 24 are Black women. And that number, that needs to move, but all these numbers need to move up. But I think the number that gave me the most sort of comfort was that of the Black members, all the Black members in the House, of all the Black members of the House, 45% are women, right? So if you look at all the Black folk, right, in DC in the House, almost half are women, right? So I do think that, and I think it's important that we hear this as a community, that there is support in our community for Black female leadership,
Good.
Right? You couldn't have a Kamala, you couldn't have a Stacey, you couldn't have a Keisha Bottoms, you couldn't have a London, Breed in San Francisco, you couldn't have a Stacey Abrams without support of Black men and Black women for Black female candidates. Now, is there more we can do? Most definitely. Higher Heights, which is also a member of our coalition, they're doing an amazing job around bringing up Black female leadership. But I do want to, in some ways, shout out the brothers. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because I got to do that sometimes, because a lot of times you hear, the narrative and the national narrative, where the Black men, Well, y'all are there and y'all are strong, okay? Y'all, the pen hell came out strong for Kamala. Now, I'm a Delta Sigma Theta sorority. I got to do that. So I know.
You're trying to start something.
I do that.
See, you were doing good and then you tried to start. So we're going to cut your mic.
You know. Chisholm. I got to do my Ida B. Wells. I got to do my Mary Church Terrell. I have to do that. But here's the thing, right? We're all from the same tribe, is what I'm saying.
The Divine Nine.
My Omegas were out, my Alphas were out, my Kappas, my Sigmas. So I will say that's going to always be a continuing conversation. You're right. But I think we have to celebrate the uniqueness in us, because a lot of times we hear about sort of where we're different in the bad ways, in a lot of ways, all the statistics,
exactly.
But let's also celebrate the ways where I think traditionally we have been unique, and that's our strength. And I will say that support of Black female leadership has been there and is a very strong foundation of the Black church, the mamas in the church, the ushers, the Black deaconess, the Black church. You know what I mean? So that's huge, because a lot of communities, you're absolutely right, that is an issue. And not that it's not for us, but as a community, as a historical record, there has been support. And I just want to say that, and then I'm gonna shut up.
Well, I'm gonna say thank you for pushing back, because that needed to be said. Okay, Chairwoman, the floor is yours.
She's absolutely right. We are a matriarchal people anyway. We all had grandmamas, strong mamas, and in the neighborhood, everybody's mama was your mama, because if you did something up on the corner, by the time you got home, they had called your mother to let your mother know. So we did have that village, and the village was strong with women in that village. But those of us that have moved into leadership, it's because we have the strong support of men behind us. Right? I could not do this without the strong support of my husband of 40 some years, who is my best friend. We met at Howard University, and my best friend, but my supporter, who recognized when I needed to go to overseas to sing, he was here for the kids, who recognized that I needed that to be all of the me that I could be, so that I could be the best me for him and for the family. So what we do have men, and what we need the men to do is to continue to lift us up and to continue to encourage us. But we have a responsibility to take them by the hand and include them in the process as well, right? And not shut them out of the process, make them partners with us, so that there is no feeling of any type of separation or any type of feeling threatened of being left out. No, include them in the process, include them in the conversation, make them part of the success of women. And I think that that's what makes us a more cohesive people. We do that, I think, better in the African American community than any other, because that is the way we were raised. We know about the village, and the village was not all women. The village was women, the village was men. And I think that we have that type of cohesive relationship already, that's part of our DNA. And I just say we continue to build on that. More importantly, we teach it to our children. We teach it to our little boys, you know, as they're growing up, to see mommy as a successful woman, to recognize that women are successful and we are proud of mommy. This is all we know, that women are successful. So of course we're going to be a part of making women successful. So what we do is we pass that on to our sons as well. So I think we're in a good place to continue moving forward. And I would not dream of making this journey in my life without brothers around me. And that's the truth.
Well, you ladies and leaders are making me smile, because I'm gonna be honest, and I hope every man will listen when you hear this. I knew my wife went to work. I knew on occasion through hearing some of her conversations that she was good at her work. What I didn't know was how good she was. When COVID-19 hit and she had to work from home, in all of our years of marriage, this was the first time I saw my wife at work. We've been married over 20 years, or approaching over 20 years, however you want to add that up. I'd never gone to an office to witness her do her things. I always took my sons and daughters to work with me. I worked in corporate America. I wanted them to see their dad in the boardroom. My daughter sat in every meeting I had when she came home from college. She took notes, she interjected. I wanted them to see what it looks like. And now she's working for a company where she's doing that very thing. But having said that, my wife, fellas, and I'm going to assume your significant other is a beast at what they do. I didn't know she worked the way she worked. I didn't know she will sit for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours. I have to go in there and say, babe, get up out of this chair. I'm seeing a whole new, at my age, a whole new thing that's been living with me. Fellas, encourage. If they're talking politics, if they're talking community issues, encourage. Go with them down to the church for the meeting. Go with them to the community center. This is where the stop sign comes from. This is where better water comes from. This is where greater school supplies and schools come from. This is where we get it from. And we cannot, at this point, let the work of all of those who came before these beautiful leaders go away. And these ladies, leaders have only added. Ma'am, you kept all 7 positions in Maryland of the incumbency. You ran 2 successful campaigns. Tiffany, the work you've done to bring people into the tent has been amazing. Fellas, we can't let this work down. So get behind those you love, get behind those you can support, and be very, very vocal about it. We are now winding down. And again, I want to remind everyone that these 2 leaders will be a part of the Salute to Maryland Black Women legislatures. This is where we get to show off our history. This is where we get to remind you of what we're fighting for. And this event can be found on Eventbrite. Please, please, the tickets, I understand, are very reasonable, and they help to support the history of Maryland. And I know this is going on in other places, but we want you to be a part of this. They are affordable tickets, and I really think every little girl should definitely hear these speakers and listen to them. They are beautiful, gorgeous, they are talented. Opera singer? Opera singer, really?
What can I say?
Really?
Really? Really,
I don't know.
absolutely.
I know if my wife was in the studio here with me and not in the other area, she would say, "Don't you dare ask her to sing on camera this morning. Don't you dare." Is there a note you can hit? Bill Clinton played the what was it he played? The
The
saxophone.
saxophone, he
Bill
did.
Clinton played the
He did.
saxophone. I'm gonna ask you, Madam Chairwoman, can you give
Oh,
us
you
a
gonna put
little
me on the
note?
spot.
Just a little bit.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. That's all you get.
You know what? At that, we can drop the mic. I want to thank I want to thank my guests. This is really important to me because I care about where this country is going. I spent my life serving it. I spent my life protecting and defending, and I'm ready to die for this country. Dr. King said, "A man who has not found something worth living for, worth dying for, is not fit to live." I'm ready to die for it, not through violent acts, but to lay down and serve for it. And I hope there are other men and women who are willing to lay down and serve. While we may not be all that the documents say we should be, it is because of their leadership that we are moving closer to that ever elusive dream. But it's coming. Remember what I said: don't give up, don't give in, and don't give out. We don't have that much farther to go, and it could not be more evident than what's laying before you now. Two leaders, two different parts of the country, doing the same thing for the Constitution and the community. You've been listening to Success in the Evening, and it has been my absolute plum pleasing pleasure to sit with the leaders of our community and country. You couldn't get any better guests. Before we leave, we'll give it to you, Madam Chairwoman, first. What would you like to say as you exit out of this broadcast? And I pray you come back for another.
I will. This has been absolutely wonderful. I just say to everyone, stay engaged. This is your country. This is your democracy. You determine the course of our lives if you stay engaged. You determine the course of your lives. You determine the course of the generations to come. So please stay engaged, engage, and communicate. Those are my words.
Yes, ma'am. Tiffany?
You know, that was perfect. And I would just add to Madam Chairwoman, onward.
See, they just double team up on me. Y'all see what's happening here, right? Onward, just stay engaged. Well, you got your marching orders, and I got to do one thing I did forget. Madam Chairwoman, part of your marching orders on your second tour, you were very blunt to the people in Maryland that we have got to be party first. You didn't mix any words with that. We must be party first, and anything else, any other idea is a colossal waste of time. You still feel the same way?
I certainly do, because any other thing is a distraction. We are on a path of what we want to see our state and our country be. That means that we have to stay focused. That means anybody else's agenda, whatever your personal concerns or anything that's outside of moving us forward on this path, as Ms. Gardner said, onward, we don't have time for. We came very, very close to losing our democracy because we were asleep at the wheel. We can never, ever do that again. We were very close. It is frightening how close. Think of what would have happened if we had lost this past election. Think of what would have happened. Think of what would have happened had we lost the House in the last election. That was the only firewall that we had. And now we have a chance to put this country back on the right path. We don't have time for distractions. Party first.
Party first. Well, guys, you've heard it. I want to thank you all for being a part of today's program. I can't thank you enough. And if you were listening to this and moved by this, you got to react to this. And that means, one, we want to see you attend the Salute to Maryland Black Women Legislatures. Attend that. It's a small investment for a great reward, and you get to hear these powerful speakers. Number two, if nobody else told you this morning, I really do care and love you. I care for this country. I care for the people in it, regardless of party. We've got to straighten up and fly right, as my grandmother would say to me often. So straighten up. Let's fly right. And as a nation, we can get there. Thank you again for listening to Success in the Evening. My name is Coach Ricky Terry, president of this organization, and I could not be prouder of today's broadcast.